Mm. Mm. Okay, we'll start with the Mangalacharan. Om Majnana Timirandasya, Jnananjana Shalakaya, Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurue Namah, Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam, Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Patakam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha, Sri Rupam Sarjatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Samsajivam, Sadvaitam Savadutam Parjana Setam Krishna Chaitanya Devam, Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sagana Lita Sri Vishakan Vitamscha, He Krishna Karna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati, Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste. तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यो च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे राम 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 हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय Hare Krishna. Today we'll continue with verse 11 from chapter 12, canto 1, birth of Emperor Parikshit. Okay. So now in this chapter we are at this point where uh, Parikshit Maharaj, when he was in his mother's womb, he got the uh, the darshan of the Supreme Lord in the four-handed Vishnu form, uh, at the size of a thumb. So when the Supreme Lord was saving him from the effulgence of the Brahmastra, so in this verse uh, it is still like the description about what Maharaj Parikshit actually saw when he was in the womb. Further description uh, about the form of the Supreme Lord. Okay, text 11. Viduya tat ameyatma bhagavan dharmagu vibhu mishato dashama sasya tatraivantar dade hari. Viduya tat ameyatma bhagavan dharmagu vibhu mishato dashama sasya tatraivantar dade hari. Viduya tat ameyatma bhagavan dharmagu vibhu mishato dashama sasya tatraivantar dade hari. विदूय तत् अमेयात्मा भगवान धर्मगुप विभुः मिशतो दशमासस्य तत्रैवान्तर्ददे हरि. Okay, anyone want to recite? Hare Krishna.
Can I try, Guru?
Yeah, sure, bro.
Viduya tat ame atma bhagavan dharmagap vibhu nisato dasamasasya tatra what?
Tatraivantarददे हरि.
Hare Hari.
Okay.
Hare Hari.
So this is Mishato. Then it is Tatra Eva Antardade.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Next. Come on, others. No one. Then we'll continue with the synonyms. Okay, synonyms. Viduya, having completely washed off. Tat, that. Ameyatma, the all-pervading super soul. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Dharmagup, the protector of righteousness. Vibhu, the supreme. Mishata, while observing. Tasama Shasya, of one who is dressed by all directions. Tatra eva, then and there. Antaha, out of sight. Dade became Hari, the Lord. Okay, I just want to explain a bit about these words. If we look at this shloka here, this the shlokas, they normally have already undergone the sandhi process. Sandhi is the merging of words in Sanskrit. So if we look at the complete verse, and when we look at the individual words here, we can see some differences. Like Mishato Dasamasasya, but here it is Mishataha Dasamasasya. So when ha and da, when they are located next to one another, there will be a sandhi, which is according to the Sanskrit grammar, it has to undergo some changes. So it becomes Misato. Also here, Tatre Vantar Dade. So this is actually the sandhi form of Tatra Eva. Tatra Eva, A and A, it becomes I. Then Eva Antaha. When A is followed by another A, it becomes the A, the big A. So that's how we have this. The sandhified form will be like will be combined like this. The shlokas will actually contain the merged form or the sandhi form, but actually they are composed of these individual words. So even for recitation, whenever there's when we see some complicated words, so we can even check here. Tatra eva is actually tatra eva. So that was regarding the sandhi. Translation: while thus being observed by the child, the Supreme Lord, personality of Godhead, the super soul of everyone, and the protector of the righteous, who stretches in all directions and who is unlimited by time and space, disappeared at once. So here in this verse also, there are further descriptions about the form of the Supreme Lord and also his characteristics. And interestingly, we can also relate these characteristics of the Supreme Lord uh, according to what we have already learned in the Bhagavad Gita also. So we'll be looking at all those explanation in detail. Purport: child Parikshit was not observing a living being who is limited by time and space. There is a gulf of difference between the Lord and the individual living being. So if we look at the 5 important subject matters of the Gita, does anyone know what are the 5 subject matters of the Bhagavad Gita? Okay, the 5 subject matters of Bhagavad Gita: Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, Karma. So from the Bhagavad Gita, we can clearly see that Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, Karma, all these are distinct entities. Though we as Jivas, we originated from the Supreme Lord, from Ishvara. Even the Prakriti also originated from the Supreme Lord, from his inferior material energy. Still, these are all distinct entities. And therefore, the verdict of the Bhagavad Gita is that though we are all part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, still we are distinct from him. We are individuals and we can never equate ourselves to the Supreme Lord. So the verdict of the Bhagavad Gita clearly rejects the idea of monism or oneness, becoming one with God or merging with the Supreme. So there is a gulf of difference between the Lord and the individual living being. So even in the Gita, there are many verses which clearly describe all these differences, especially in chapter 13 of the Gita. The Lord is mentioned herein as the supreme living being, unlimited by time and space. Every living being is limited by time and space. So if we look at the even from the 5 subject matters of the Gita, as mentioned just now, Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, Karma. So a very important element here is Kala or time, and it is very important for us to understand its significance. especially we as conditioned souls, because we are trapped here in this material world, which is under the influence of time. So we are in a fallen condition compared to the spiritual world. We are in a fallen condition in this material world due to the influence of time. So this is also another very key distinction between the material world and spiritual world. In the spiritual world, there is no influence of time, and therefore that's how all the residents of the spiritual world, the liberated beings, that's why they are regarded as infallible beings. Still, even the liberated souls, they cannot be considered as one with the Supreme or equal to the Supreme. They are still subservient to the Supreme Lord, but they are infallible. This distinction is also explained in the Gita by Lord Krishna in chapter 15, from verses 16 to 18. From in these three verses, the Supreme Lord explains the difference between the conditioned souls in the material world and the liberated souls. The conditioned souls in the material world are the fallible beings, and the liberated souls are infallible in the spiritual world. However, in verses 17 and 18 of the 15th chapter of Gita, the Supreme Lord also explains that he is transcendental. He is beyond both these categories, and therefore he is supreme. He is celebrated as Purushottama. So that is the difference between the Supreme Lord and even the liberated souls. So we here in this material world, the conditioned souls, we are fallible. The liberated souls in the spiritual world, they are infallible, but still the Supreme Lord is transcendental. And therefore, even the liberated souls, they are not one with the Supreme. They get liberated, they enter the spiritual world, and still they gain the association of the Supreme Lord as servants, as individual servants. So there's no the notion of merging with the Supreme or oneness with the Supreme is clearly invalid from the authentic verses of the Bhagavad Gita. There is a great difference between the Supreme Soul and the common individual soul. Even though a living being is qualitatively one with the Lord, quantitatively there's a great difference. In the Bhagavad Gita, both the living beings and the Supreme Being are said to be all-pervading. Yena sarvam idam tatam. Yet there is a difference between these two kinds of all-pervasiveness. So here the focus is specifically on the soul. It is referring to the spirit soul and the individual spirit soul and the super soul. Both are all-pervasive. Yena sarvam idam tatam. But still there is a major difference between these all-pervasiveness. So this pada, this part of the sloka, it actually comes from Gita 2.17. So this is the part where Lord Krishna explains. This is still in the very beginning of the transcendental teachings of the Gita in chapter 2. This is the earliest subtopic, which is explained by the Supreme Lord regarding the distinction between spirit soul and the material body. So in 2.17, the Supreme Lord says, Avinashi tu tadvidhi yena sarvam idam tatam. Vinasham avyayasya na kaschit kaltum arhasi. So yena sarvam idam tatam, that which pervades the entire material body. That which pervades the entire body, you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. So the soul pervades the entire material body, and that's how the material body, which consists of nothing but dead matter, it gains consciousness. Without the soul, the material body is nothing but dead matter. And as long as the soul is present, as long as the soul resides in the material body, the the material body appears to be animate with consciousness. But the moment the soul leaves the material body, no matter how much the so-called modern scientists they may try, they cannot revive that dead body, which consists of nothing but dead matter. This happens once the soul, which was residing in the material body, once it leaves the material body, then the body consists of nothing but dead matter. So the existence of the soul cannot be denied, no matter how much the modern scientists may try to distort. And the the presence of consciousness in the material body is the symptom of the soul. Common living being or soul can be all pervading within his own limited body, but the supreme living being is all pervading in all space and all time. A common living being cannot extend its influence over another common living being by its all pervasiveness. But the supreme super soul, the personality of Godhead, is unlimitedly able to exert his influence over all places and all times and over all living beings. So he is beyond time and space, because the spiritual world itself, as mentioned earlier, the spiritual world is always free from the influence of time. Only in the material world, we as the conditioned souls, even up to the level of Lord Brahma, even Lord Brahma is bound by the influence of time. So even he gets to live only up to 100 years according to his calendar. So even the demigods, they also have their own calendar. They also live up to 100 years, and still all these living entities, including the topmost Jiva Tattva, Lord Brahma, all the living entities in the material world have to die. So our incessant cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi keeps going on since time immemorial, mainly due to the influence of time. So as long as we are present here in this material world, we will be subject to the influence of time. And that is why that is exactly what makes this material world inferior to the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, all the residents of the spiritual world, the liberated souls, they regain their transcendental body, their original transcendental body, and they are able to experience the Satchidananda qualities, namely eternality, knowledge, and bliss. They actually regain these qualities. These qualities were always there as part of our spirit soul, because the Satchidananda qualities, they they originate from the Supreme Lord. And since we are eternal fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, we also have these qualities, but in very minute quantity. We have qualitative similarity with the Supreme Lord, but due to our material contamination, uh, being conditioned by the three modes of material nature in this material world, and also we are bound by the effect of time, so we cannot experience those original qualities. For the embodied soul, the soul which is liberated, it regains the original transcendental form, and it can experience the original qualities of Satchidananda. But since we are bound, we are embodied souls in this material world, we will be subject to the influence of time. And that's why this cycle, it can never be stopped in the material world. Even after death, the spirit soul leaves the previous material body. It transmigrates to another body based on the activities carried out in when it was in the previous body. Then once it takes a new body, then so uh, that first milestone, that is regarded as birth, though there's no birth for the spirit soul. The point at which the spirit soul entered into the new material body that is regarded as birth, and the same cycle of Jara and Vyadi, they continue, Jara and Vyadi continue from the moment birth occurs, because the process of aging starts from the moment we are born. So ironically, every year people are celebrating the birthday, despite the fact that the countdown is on. We are actually celebrating the fact that we have so little time left. Of course, from a spiritual perspective, it is actually a matter to be celebrated, because we are actually celebrating the fact that we have very little time left in this material world. We don't have much time left in this Dukalayam, but it is only wise if we celebrate based upon the fact that we are doing enough bhakti, then we can celebrate. Otherwise, if we are just wasting our time and thinking that we are going to be liberated from this material world, then it is very unlikely for that to happen. So if we are seriously engaged in bhakti, then there is a reason to celebrate the fact that we have much less time left every year whenever we celebrate our birthday. So as long as we do not engage in spiritual inquiry, we cannot liberate ourselves. And if for those who have gained the human form of life, if they are unable to liberate themselves, so it is very unlikely for someone to liberate himself from another more degraded form. So from the time when birth happens, all the problems start again, though the soul was also present in another different material body in the previous birth. So once the new birth takes place, then the problems of Jara and Vyadi will start until the end, the other milestone, which is known as death. But of course, depending on our activities, whether we transmigrate into another material body or whether we regain our original transcendental body, it all depends on what we do during the time during which we occupy a certain material body. So the ideal time for us to be engaged in spiritual inquiry and devotional service is now, since we have obtained this exalted human form of life. Otherwise, as long as we remain in ignorance, we are also going to remain in this dark cloud. So from the if we look at the cover page of Srimad Bhagavatam, so we can see the spiritual world, and there is a dark cloud. The Mahatattva is represented as a dark cloud, which is devoid of the Brahmajyoti effulgence. So that darkness, apart from the condition of being devoid of light, darkness from the spiritual perspective, it also refers to ignorance. So as long as we are trapped in this material world, we are going to remain in ignorance. And if we do not engage in spiritual inquiry, and as long as it does not culminate into bhakti, so we'll be forced to remain in this material world, and we will always be under the influence of time. But by going back to the spiritual world, we won't have to undergo this miserable cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi, because in the spiritual world there is no influence of time. So even time itself, as the Supreme Lord mentions in the Gita in many verses, especially in chapter 10 and 11, the Supreme Lord is also time personified. He is the form of time. So even for those who deny the existence of God, they can never deny that they are free from the influence of time. No one can deny that we are not affected by time. From the moment we are born, the process of aging starts, and after a certain advanced stage, uh, our condition becomes more miserable with so many health complications. So Jara and Vyadi, the problems of Jara and Vyadi start from the very moment we are born until it ends with death. But that does not necessarily mark the end of our suffering unless if we have utilized our time by being engaged in bhakti. A common living being cannot extend its influence over another common living being by its all-pervasiveness, but the supreme supersoul, the personality of Godhead, is unlimitedly able to exert his influence over all places and all times and over all living beings. So how is this possible? Simple, as the Supreme Lord himself says in Gita 10.8, Aham Sarvasya Prabho, everything emanated from him. He is the source of everything, the cause of all causes, as mentioned in Brahma Samhita 5.1. So Dharma, he is even beyond time and space. So he himself is time personified. So apart from chapter 10, also in chapter 11, in 11.32, the Supreme Lord says, Kalos Piloka Shayakrit Pravurdo. Time I am, and I've come here to destroy everyone. So even for those who deny the existence of God, they can never deny that they are under the influence of time. And the Supreme Lord says in Gita 11.32 that he himself is time personified. So even for those who do not acknowledge the existence of God, even for them, the Supreme Lord is always present in the form of time. And regarding the pervasiveness in terms of space, even the spiritual world, which is 3 times larger than the material world, uh, both the spiritual world and material world originate from uh, the energies of the Supreme Lord. So he is the source of these two energies, the Antaranga and Bahiranga Shakti. So even in the material world, starting from the first Purusha Avatara, from the Avatara of Mahavishnu, he further expands into Garbhodakashaya Vishnu, then Shirodakashaya Vishnu. So even within the entire Mahatattva, there are innumerable universes with Garbhodakashaya Vishnu in each universe and also headed by Lord Brahma. Then even within each universe, all the living entities and every single atom is pervaded by the super soul, by Shirodakashaya Vishnu, externally and also internally. The Supreme Lord in his Swayam Rupa, he always resides eternally in Goloka Vrindavana, in the spiritual world. But at the same time, he also exists internally as the super soul within the hearts of all living entities. So uh, that is the main difference of the all-pervasive quality of the super soul compared to the individual spirit soul. Also, there are further descriptions regarding these distinctions from chapter 13 of the Gita regarding Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Jnanam, Neyam, Purusha, Prakriti. So in chapter 13 of the Gita, it starts with Arjuna's question regarding 6 subject matters. Prakriti, Purusha, nature, enjoyer, feel and know of the feel, Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Jnanam, Neyam, knowledge and object of knowledge. So in the Gita, chapter 13, it covers these 6 subject matters. So it starts with Arjuna's question, and the Supreme Lord provides detailed explanation about these 6 subject matters. Out of these 6, 2 important subject matters are Kshetra, Kshetrajna, the field and know of the field. So from this chapter, we know that the field refers to the material body. The field of activities is our body. Kshetrajna is the know of the field. So in every material body, the spirit soul which resides in that material body, in all the 84 lakh species of material body, uh, they are pervaded by individual spirit souls, and they are also accompanied by the super soul who resides in their hearts. So the super soul, the distinction between the super soul and the individual spirit soul, they are those distinctions are explained in this chapter. But before going into the differences between uh, individual spirit soul and the super soul, there's also the distinction between the spirit soul and the material body, which is actually covered in chapter 2 of the Gita. From verses 2.11 to 2.30, the Supreme Lord talks about these important distinctions between the material body and the individual spirit soul. So that is what self-realization is all about. It covers these two important divisions. First, we need to know about the distinction between material body and spirit soul. Then the extended part of it is regarding the distinction between the spirit soul and the super soul. So that's why, as we have seen in our small book reading session also, uh, so we are in our small book reading session, we are covering this book titled Beyond Birth and Death. So we are still in chapter 1, just started last week. So even in this chapter, it is mentioned the very first step in self-realization is realizing one's identity as separate from the body. So this is the starting point for self-realization. Self-realization simply means realizing the self. So who is the self? The self is the spirit soul. Okay, but that is only the first step. If we think that uh, I'm uh, I'm not this material body, I'm the spirit soul. So if we simply stop there, still that is not enough. It has to culminate in the ultimate realization, which is to realize that we are eternal fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. And therefore, we have to be engaged in his service as his eternal servants. So that should be the final conclusion. So merely realizing the difference between material body and spirit soul does not suffice. It should culminate in understanding the difference between the individual spirit soul and super soul. So in chapter 2 of the Gita, in the first part, it is mainly about the difference between the material body and the spirit soul. And then later in chapter 13 of the Gita, it talks about in this part regarding the know of the field and knower. It also talks about the difference between the knower in each field and the knower of all fields. So in 13.15, Sarvendra Gunabhasham Sarvendra Virjitam Asaktam Sarvabhitsaiva Nirgunam Gunabhoktacha. The super soul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses, he is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time, he is the master of all modes of material nature. Okay, this is one verse which talks about the qualities of the super soul compared to the qualities of individual spirit souls, especially the conditioned souls. So when we go through these verses, we can clearly see the distinction between the individual spirit soul and the super soul. And from these verses, we can clearly see that the individual spirit soul is still very inferior compared to the super soul. Though there is qualitative similarity between us, the individual spirit soul and the super soul, still we are very inferior compared to the super soul. So it is absolutely foolish to regard that we are equal to God, or even to regard that we can attain liberation by merging into the Supreme. Also in 13.23, Upadrasta Anumanta cha Balta Bhokta Maheshwara Paramatmeti Chapyukta Deesmin Purusha Paraha. Yet in this body there is another transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the Supreme Proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as the Super Soul. So in these verses from the Gita, chapter 13, we can see the distinction between the individual spirit soul and the super soul. In the first part, in chapter 2, it is about the difference between material body and individual spirit soul. Then in the advanced part later in Gita chapter 13, it covers these details about the distinction between spirit soul and super soul. So the verdict of the Gita is that the spirit souls, though they are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, still we are individual spirit souls, and we are still subservient to the super soul, who is the knower of all fields. So that is the complete that should be the complete understanding of about self-realization. It is not enough if we merely realize that we are spirit souls and not this material body. That is not going to solve our problems. It should culminate in understanding the uh, the more advanced part of it. So uh, the first step in self-realization is to realize that I'm I'm spirit soul, I'm not this material body. So where did this spirit soul come from? It came from the Supreme Lord. The spirit soul is the eternal fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and therefore every individual spirit soul is the eternal servant of the Supreme Lord. Only by realizing this complete with this complete understanding, we can act in a way that is favorable to liberate ourselves from this material entanglement. Merely understanding that we are spirit souls and not this material body will not help. We need to go further and understand regarding the origin of the spirit soul itself. So from there we will know that we, the individual spirit souls, we originated from the super soul, from the Supreme Lord, and we are his eternal servants. So when we say eternal servants, that is our original constitutional position. So regardless of whether we are in the spiritual world or in the material world, we will always remain his eternal servants. Though in the material world we are not acting as his servants. Uh, First of all, we are in this material world, in this degraded condition from our original position. We are in this much more degraded condition because of our material contamination, because of our desires to become uh, enjoyers and controllers. But we can never attain that position because our nature, our original constitutional position is to be servants. So, since we refuse to be servants of the Supreme Lord directly under his association, so we are now servants of Maya, and Maya is nothing but the byproduct of the Supreme Lord's inferior energy. So, in both cases, whether we are in the spiritual world or in the material world, we will always remain servants. But due to our material desires, we are still being servants. We have uh, we have failed to attain our desire of becoming enjoyers and controllers. On the contrary, we are only suffering from the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. And during our lifetime, we are also vulnerable to the threefold miseries: Adhyatmic, Adevik, Adibautik. So our material desire, which due to which we wanted to become enjoyers and controllers, has only resulted in additional problems. It did not uh, it did not really materialize, but it only brought material miseries for us. So the first step in self-realization is to realize that we are not this material body, we are spirit souls, but it should also culminate in understanding our original constitutional position about from where this spirit soul originated from. Then we will understand that we are the eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord, and from there we will further understand that we are always meant to be eternal servants of the Supreme Lord. So only if our spiritual inquiry culminates into understanding that ultimate verdict, we can never solve our problems. And even after understanding uh, that part about our eternal constitutional position, then we should further act uh, according to the instructions of the Supreme Lord in Bhagavad Gita, and also based on our based on the instruction of our acharyas. In the Gita itself, the Supreme Lord has made it very clear in many important verses like 9.34 and 18.65. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Mami vaisri satyam ke prajani prayosmi. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Mami vaisri yuktvayavam atmana matparayana. So, even in the Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Lord has made it very clear that we should become his devotees and engage in devotional service. So, whatever self-realization that we have, it should culminate into understanding our original constitutional position, and it should be followed up with action in devotional service. Only then we can solve our problems to liberate ourselves from this material entanglement. So uh, those are the key distinctions between the spirit soul and the super soul. So again, it is absolutely foolish to regard that we ourselves are equal to God, or that we can merge with God uh, to attain liberation. And because he is all pervasive, unlimited by time and space, he can appear even within the womb of the mother of child Parikshit. He is mentioned herein as the protector of the righteous. Anyone who is a surrendered soul unto the Supreme is righteous, and he is specifically protected by the Lord in all circumstances. The Lord is the indirect protector of the unrighteous also, for he rectifies their sins through his external potency. So, regarding this also, there are many verses from the Gita which is mentioned by the Supreme Lord himself, like verses 4.7 and 4.8. In this verse, there's this word, Bhagavan Dharma Gub Vibhu. Dharma Gub is the protector of righteousness. So that's what uh, Lord Krishna himself says in the Gita in verses 4.7 and 4.8. Yada yada idharmasya glanirvavati bharata abhyutanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyam paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya sadhuskritam dharma samsthapanataya sambhavami yuge yuge. So the Supreme Lord always appears millennium after millennium to protect the pious, to annihilate the miscreants, and also to re-establish Dharma. And therefore, he is known as Dharma Gub. And for the devotees, especially, the Supreme Lord himself also mentions in the Gita 9.31 that his devotees never perish, and we are also always protected from any temporary accidental fall downs. Now, regarding the point of devotees, in chapter 7 of the Gita, in verses 7.15 and 7.16, the Supreme Lord explains regarding the the types of people who do not surrender unto him, and then he explains about the types of people who who surrender unto him. So in 7.14, in 7.12 and 7.13, he talks about the problems in this material world for the conditioned souls, about how uh, the conditioned souls are always in illusion in this material world in 7.12 and 13. Then in 7.14, he says, Daiviyesha Gunamayi Mamaya Durataya Mamevaya Prapatinte Mayametam Tanatite. So in 7.14, he says that those though the effect of Maya is so strong, still those who surrender unto him can easily cross over the ocean of material existence. Since Maya itself is a byproduct of the inferior energy of the Supreme Lord, in order to escape or to liberate ourselves from the influence of Maya, we simply have to surrender to the Supreme Lord. And then in 7.15, the Supreme Lord talks about the 4 types of people who do not surrender unto him. Then in 7.16, he talks about the 4 types of people who surrender unto him. Now, out of those 4 types of people who surrender unto him, in 7.16, the Supreme Lord says, Chaturvida bhajante mam, jana sukirtana arjuna, arto jignasu rasati, jnani cha balatar sabha. So the 4 types of people, the one who is in distress, the one who is going after material wealth, the one who is inquisitive, and the jnani. These 4 types of people, they surrender to the Supreme Lord. Now, I have a question. Out of these 4 types, how many of them are devotees? This is in reference to the verse spoken by the Lord in Gita 7.16. So there are 4 categories of people mentioned by the Supreme Lord. So the one who desires for wealth, the one who is in distress, the one who is inquisitive, and the jnani. These 4 categories, they all surrender to the Supreme Lord. They all worship the Supreme Lord. So are all these 4 categories of people, are they devotees?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. Any explanation, Ru?
Not perfect, but ultimately they'll come back to Lord Krishna. They're not perfect devotees, but full devotees, but slowly they'll become perfect devotees, Prabhu.
Okay. Any other answers? Are all these 4 types, are they all devotees?
Lord says, if anybody comes to me, then I will be, they are becoming devotees, Prabhu. Instead of going to demigods, you are asking for any favor, then you are a devotee.
Okay. Yeah, in 7.16, Lord Krishna talks about the four types of those who worship him, those who surrender unto him. But all these in all these 4 types of people, they have different purposes. This is also explained by the Lord in verses 7.17 and 7.18. So the Lord actually says he regards all 4 as Mahatmas. This is also mentioned in Gita 7.17 and 7.18. The Supreme Lord acknowledges all 4 types of people as Mahatmas. But out of the 4, the Supreme Lord especially favors the Jnani out of the 4. This is also mentioned in 7.18. I mean, either in 7.17 or 7.18. But there's also a description from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. When we talk about devotees, even from the Gita itself, we know that the devotee is the topmost position. Like, regardless of why we surrender to the Supreme Lord, whether it is the people who pray for material wealth, or whether it is the people who are in distress, ultimately, only the jnani is especially favored by the Supreme Lord, because only the jnani knows what bhakti is all about. Because for those who are seeking material wealth, they do not realize that material wealth is temporary, just like this material world itself. So simply by praying for temporary relief from distress, or from uh, or praying for material wealth, it is not going to solve our problems. So that itself is actually due to the ignorance. Like, apart from the jnani, all the remaining three categories, they are still devoid of self-realization, because they do not know that they are not this material body. They are still identifying themselves with the material designations. So that's why the Supreme Lord actually favors the jnanis more than the other remaining three categories. However, he still recognizes all the four categories as Mahatmas, those who surrender to him. However, he also stresses the importance of becoming a jnani or devotee, because only the devotee knows why we are worshipping the Supreme Lord. Because based on the verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it is defined, Bhakti is defined as Anyabhilashita Sunyam Jnana Karmadhyanavutam Anukulena Krishnanu Shilanam Bhakti Uttama. The topmost devotee who is engaged in devotional service should be someone who is completely devoid of material desires and fruitive activities. So this is from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So the true devotee, though the Supreme Lord regards all four categories as Mahatmas, still the true devotee is only the jnani who understands the essence of devotional service. So even from the explanation from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it defines bhakti as that which is devoid of all sorts of material desires and fruitive activities. So those who are actually seeking material wealth, those who pray to the Supreme Lord with the intention of seeking material wealth, or for relief from distress, of course they are regarded as Mahatmas. Still, they cannot really be considered as devotees yet. However, due to the fact that they are willing to surrender to Supreme Lord, ultimately they will attain that stage. But the true definition of bhakti is that, based on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it has to be jnana karmadi anavrutam, anyabhilashita sunyam jnana karmadi anavrutam. So it has to be devoid of all sorts of material desires and fruitive activities. So based on that definition, only the jnani is the one who is the topmost devotee, because he knows the essence of devotional service. And that's why the Supreme Lord also specifically mentions that the jnani is especially favored by him. However, even the other categories, they are also Mahatmas, and with by the mercy of Guru Sadhu Shastra, they are also qualified to attain the position of devotees. So the Supreme Lord descends to the material world to establish dharma, and also to protect the devotees, and also to reclaim them to the spiritual world. The Lord is the indirect protector of the unrighteous also, for he rectifies their sins through his external potency. So even the unrighteous, the demons like Kansa, Hiranyakashipu, Ravana, they were also indirectly meditating upon the Supreme Lord, though in envy and anger. So still they also receive the mercy of the Supreme Lord. Uh, due to their constant meditation, but that was in the unfavorable rasa. The Lord is mentioned herein as one who is dressed in the 10 directions. This means dressed with garments on 10 sides, up and down. He is present everywhere and can appear and disappear at his will from everywhere and anywhere. His disappearance from the sight of the child Parikshit does not mean that he appeared on the spot from any other place. He was present there, and even after his disappearance, he was there, although invisible to the eyes of the child. So here, the child Parikshit, he got the vision of the Supreme Lord, and then that vision like disappeared from that form of the Supreme Lord disappeared from his vision. So this was the case of Parikshit. But there are also other devotees who had the similar experience. We know that from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Can anyone tell the names of two devotees who had this experience? Even from the first and second cantos, we know about these two devotees. They got the vision of the Supreme Lord for a while, and then he disappeared. Just two names. They are the topmost devotees in our sampradaya. The topmost.
Dhruva Maharaj.
Brahma and Narada. Yeah, Dhruva also got the vision, but here, similar to Parikshit case, so he appeared for a while and then disappeared. So even in the case of Narada, in chapter 5, during the conversation with Vyasadev, so Narada Muni was explaining about how he was meditating upon the Supreme Lord, and then the vision appeared and disappeared. Also in the case of Brahma, he also had the vision and then disappeared. So the Supreme Lord made appeared in such a way, he gave them the vision for a while and then disappeared, as explained by him also, especially in the case of Brahma in the second canto. The Supreme Lord explains that he appeared for a while and disappeared immediately, mainly to further increase our hankering for the Supreme Lord. So that vision, it further increased, that temporary vision further increased their bhakti, especially in the case of Narada Muni and Brahma. So something similar also happened to Parikshit. He was present there, and even after his disappearance, he was there, although invisible to eyes of the child. This material covering of the effulgent phenomenon is also something like a womb of the mother nature, and we are all put into the womb by the Lord, the Father of all living beings. So this is also mentioned by Lord Krishna in chapter 14, 14.3 and 14.4. 14.3, Mama Yonir Mahat Brahma. So Mahat Brahma refers to the material nature. The Supreme Lord is Param Brahma. We, the living entities, we are Jiva Brahman, and the material nature is Mahat Brahma. Mahat Brahman. And also in 14.4 Gita, the Supreme Lord says, Sarva Yonishu Kaunteya Murtaya Sambhavantiya Tasham Brahma Mahat Yonir Aham Bija Pradapita. So the Supreme Lord injects into the womb of the material nature, and all the living entities are his children. So he is the father of all living beings. He is present everywhere, even in this material womb of Mother Durga, and those who are deserving can see the Lord. So just a bit more, I just want to read a bit from Sararata Darshini, the commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur for this verse, 1:12:11. Okay, the commentary for this verse from Sararata Darshini. Dharmagub means the Lord who maintains. his quality of being affectionate to his devotee. He was seen by Parikshit, who was just about to be born, being 10 months in the womb, Dasama Sasya. So, in this explanation from Prabhupada's purport, Dasama Sasya is explained in terms of the 10 directions. In Saravatarshni, it refers to the 10 months in the womb. The Lord disappeared from there where he was situated without going elsewhere because he is all powerful. Vibhu, he entered the womb and after attracting Parikshit mind, Hari attractor, Hari means attractor, he disappeared. He entered the womb and after attracting Parikshit mind, he disappeared. This is the quality of the thief. He enters in and then disappears. Like a deceitful night prowler, he had entered into the womb to steal Parikshit's mind. This metaphor is implied. So this is from the Sarada Darshini commentary. So uh, that limited period of time during which the Supreme Lord was visible to Parikshit, it was also a special mercy for him because based on that vision, that that vision for a short, very short period of time, that kind of uh, that actually made Parikshit to be always engaged in meditation of the Supreme Lord. So later in this chapter, we will also see the explanation about the meaning of the name Parikshit, because later in life, every time Parikshit Maharaj would meet someone new, he would always be reminded of the vision of the form of the Supreme Lord, which he saw in the womb of his mother, and then he tries to recall whether was this the person who I saw earlier. So in that way, he was always constantly in meditation of the Supreme Lord. So similar to Narada Muni and Lord Brahma, even for Parikshit Maharaj, the Supreme Lord appeared for a while, attracted Parikshit's mind and disappeared. So that was also a special mercy of the Supreme Lord to further increase the devotion towards him. So that's all for today. Next week we'll continue with the verse 12. Any questions or comments? Okay. Thank you. Hare Krishna.